too much of a difference from the story Krystal has shared from Philadelphia to Nigeria as well. Over the years, Nigerians have complained about the brutality of the Nigerian police, and most of them have actually taken on to the streets to protest. But the recent NSAS protest in Nigeria has come to the fore much more abundantly clear to Nigerians that there is a need for not just police reforms, but there is a need to stop police brutality. The reason are largely because the number of death tolls rising from police brutality has been extremely enormous. Human rights activists and international bodies have called on the Nigerian government to see how they can disband certain movements in the Nigerian police force that intends to checkmate certain types of crime in the guise of such appellation, but they do much more evil than what they were set up or what they have been set up to do. So this story hits more heavily, especially on the 20th of October 2020, where Nigerian protesters who were peacefully demonstrating on the streets, largely around the Lekki tollgate axis, locked hands together, singing the national anthem with the Nigerian flag raised up high above their heads, were shot at intentfully by men of the Nigerian military. It called for a lot of attention and a lot of backlash from celebrities, from human rights activists, from people you could refer to as ordinary Nigerians, and literally across Africa and even the world, because that was never expected from the Nigerian military. Questions are still being asked, and a lot of issues that have been raised with respect to that. There has been a lot of discussion around that borderline, and it shows that the protest was really, really intent on stopping police brutality. Whether or not the protest has achieved its aim is a different symposium discussion altogether. So the clamor for the brutality from the Nigerian police to perhaps be minimal or totally annihilated remains very contentious in the social and global space, particularly in Nigeria as well.
3 out of 4 Nigerians have experienced to share as regards being brutalized by the police. Now it has become so common, it's become so normal that everyone thinks it's normal. Like you step out of the house and it's more like a greeting, oh, but did you meet any policeman today? And it's like more like a greeting, oh yeah, I did, I was brutalized. It's like everything is now it is so normal that the policemen, approaching you, not just about working, they go and tag emails and they profile you for the way you look. You're carrying an iPhone, you're driving a car, you're being dressed so nicely, and you're being stopped and asked questions that do not relate to their line of job. I mean, the police were to protect life and properties, right? And not to go in trying to scare citizens, trying to kill citizens of the country they were supposed to protect.
Okay, I really think that social media has had a lot of effect on how well we can protest, especially in Nigeria. Funny, this year, the Nigerian government was trying to put restrictions on the use of social media by Nigeria. So there was a social media bill that was proposed, and a number of people had to go speak to the government about it and were withdrawn. If the social media bill had passed, I do not think that the NSAS movement would have had as much effect as it had in this month, because this movement has actually it started in 2017, but only because the social media bill did not pass this year was it able to actually reach its peak. So I really think that if that had been put in place, we would not have had the kind of impact that we had. Now, with the entire incident that happened in October, the government, I'm sure there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of clamor and side talk about reinstating the bill and the kind of destruction that social media caused because of the violences that erupted as a result of the hijack on the NSAS protest. However, even though it looks like we did not get SARS to end in a form, I think that we've birthed something new. In Nigeria. The day those young citizens sat on the floor and all the flags and sang the national anthem, and the blood stained the flag. That day, many youths moved from the sideline to the front line, because before now, we just looked and just hoped that things would change. We thought the older generation, they knew best, and when it was time, they would do the right thing. Now we understand that we don't need to wait for them. We need to take our future in our hands, and we need to start now.
It's important for us to recognize the way that the language of peaceful, as it is applied to protest, is utilized as a way of criminalizing our resistance, right? It's utilized to attempt to drive a wedge between respectable forms of protest that the state is prepared to allow and other kinds of resistance that it is prepared to criminalize and punish, right? And so I think it's very important for us to think about what kind of peace is even possible in a system that is rooted in violence against Black people specifically. I've attended this week protests that were intending to be peaceful, but we were met with violence by the police. And if you have attended protests regularly, or hopefully this has not been your experience, but a very common experience I have when I protest is that the police intentionally try to escalate violence. They intentionally try to create situations that are tense. They want to be able to arrest people. You know, there was a report a couple of weeks ago about how Philadelphia police officers got $70 million in overtime this summer. And so they actually enjoy being out there. At least that's how it appears to me, because there's a smugness, there's a disdain, there's a way that they willfully provoke people, put us in high pressure situations in order for there to be violence. So I just want to ground us in that reality, because I think there's a way that the discourse of peacefulness with protests is actually working against the kind of freedom Black people are seeking and striving and rising up for. But I should also say that for over 15 years, I've done research in Nigeria, and actually recently published a piece in Harper's Bazaar kind of breaking down what's going on with NSARS. So I am really eager to explore the connections between both movements. So as it pertains to the local context in Philadelphia, on Monday afternoon, the Philadelphia police responded to a call for an ambulance for a 27-year-old Black man by the name of Walter Wallace Jr., who lived in West Philadelphia and who was in the midst of a mental health crisis that the police department was aware of and also familiar with, because he has had encounters in the past with police and has, had need for care from mental health and other kinds of professionals. However, on Monday, instead of extending care to someone who needed it, the Philadelphia police shot Walter Wallace Jr. 14 times in front of his mother, in front of his community members who did not feel threatened and who were begging the police officers to not hurt him. Instead, they killed him. And since the first night, people in the community, including myself, came into the streets to demand justice for Walter Wallace Jr. and also to continue raising alarm that many of us have been raising this summer. Many of us were in the streets all throughout this summer. And also for years, many of us have been doing this work, really drawing attention to police violence and state violence. And on Monday night, community members went to the precinct at 55th and Pine, which is where they dispatched the officers. And we were provoked and brutalized by the police officers on that night. I personally had to run for my life from the police officers. On Tuesday night, a very similar thing happened, although we started out at Malcolm X Park with a rally. And then we marched to the precinct once again, and then marched back to 52nd Street. And a lot of people were arrested. Over 100 people have been arrested in the protests. I know personally many people who were brutalized, again, had to run for our lives. And, you know, a dear friend and organizer, Anthony Smith with Philly for Real Justice, was arrested by federal agents on Wednesday. And so what we are seeing here, which is very similar to what we are seeing in Nigeria, is that police kill Black people. From the US to West Africa to South America and everywhere in between. And when we rise up to protest against the way police kill Black people, we are met with more police violence.
What Dr. Krystal mentioned was I'm so glad she mentioned the spontaneous utterance that she happened to hear during the protests for what's happening here in Philadelphia locally, because I think the first and the most important thing that we can be doing right now is making those connections. Of course, everyone, I mean, the protests that happened this summer, you know, they got global attention. It wasn't just what we as Americans were witnessing. The whole world saw the uprisings, the frustrations of Americans seeing time and time again the lives of unarmed Black people being taken out, whether it's not just police. We should also remember, we're talking about police brutality, but Ahmaud Arbery was killed by ordinary citizens. And it was the same government structure that protected his killers from prosecution for months. So the whole world saw that. They saw the frustration, stored it in their memory, and then things are happening in other places. And now, through the assistance of social media, people are making the connections. They're seeing that this is not just happening in one place. It's happening everywhere around the world. And unfortunately, the common denominator is Black people. Black people, time and time again, are the ones that are being oppressed.